Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a look at a universal experience that has completely baffled human beings for generations. We're going to unravel the scientific mystery of why time just seems to absolutely fly by as we get older. We'll be breaking down the biology, the psychology, and the math behind how we actually perceive time. Okay, let's dive into this. Think about this quote for a second. I remember when I was a kid waiting an hour for my favorite TV show. That felt like eternity. We've all been there, right? I mean, waiting for a show like Sharon, Lois, and Bram to come on felt like an absolute lifetime when you were little. But talk to almost any adult today and you'll hear a totally different story. It's something pretty much everyone agrees upon. Each passing year just seems to go faster and faster. But is it just an illusion?
Well, for a really long time, there's been this very reasonable-sounding mathematical argument to try and explain it. The theory suggests that time speeds up because each year makes up a smaller and smaller fraction of your total life. So, for example, if you're 20 years old, 1 year is exactly 1/20th of your entire existence. That's a pretty decent chunk of time. But when you hit 67, a single year is only 1/67th of your life. So mathematically speaking, the years become a much smaller percentage of your lived experience. Makes perfect sense, right?
But hold on, there's actually a massive flaw with that math. If we truly perceive time based on those fractions, and you calculate the area under the curve of that fraction, you'd find that you have already lived half of your entire perceived subjective life by the time you are just 6 years old. Just let that sink in for a second. Half of your perceived life over before you even finish the first grade? No way. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense at all. Our brains do not perceive time as a simple math equation, so we've got to look elsewhere. Section 1. The slowing internal clock. So, moving away from mathematical fractions, we need to investigate our actual physical brains to see what biological factors are at play here. To test this, researchers conducted an experiment right on the boardwalk of Venice Beach. They asked two different groups of people, a younger group and an older group, to close their eyes, not count out loud, and simply guess when exactly 1 minute had passed. And the younger participants, they were remarkably accurate. They called out that a minute had passed at 1 minute and 2 seconds and 1 minute and 5 seconds. They were literally right on the money.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the results from the older participants. When they were asked to estimate a single minute, they didn't stop the clock until 1 minute and 47 seconds had passed. They nearly waited 2 full minutes, genuinely believing it had only been 60 seconds. So why does this happen? Well, all over the world, older people typically overestimate time exactly like this. Science tells us that as we age, our neuron firing rate, specifically our neuron conduction velocity, actually decreases. Think of this firing rate like your brain's internal clock. If your internal metronome starts ticking slower and slower as you age, the external time of the world around you is naturally going to feel like it's speeding up, by comparison. And this leads us to the concept of chronoception, which is the scientific term for our fundamental sense of time. But here's the thing. Chronoception is incredibly weird compared to our other senses. Think about sight, or hearing, or touch. They all have these specialized receptor cells, right? Like rods and cones in our eyes, or taste buds on our tongues. And they're processed in specific, localized parts of the brain. Chronoception has absolutely none of that. It isn't localized to just one brain region, which tells us that our sense of time isn't just one coherent single physical thing. Yet, despite lacking a specific time center, studies show this absolutely incredible fact. Rats who have had their neocortex entirely removed, which by the way is the higher order thinking part of the mammalian brain, are still able to accurately time a 40-second interval. This proves that our sense of time evolved very, very early in our biological history. It's this foundational survival function that is just baked deep into the brain, completely independent of our complex, conscious thoughts. Section 2. The power of novelty and flow.
But hey, biology is really only half the story. Looking at the psychology of time, our attention and our environment can actively alter that clock in our heads. We've all noticed that really good movies or incredible vacations seem to fly by much faster than they actually are, right? Well, this is due to a psychological state known as flow. When we're deeply focused on something, whether we're playing sports, totally engrossed in creating art, or meditating, we literally stop noticing that time is passing. Our active attention completely shrinks our perception of duration. Because older adults are often more settled and can easily fall into engrossing routines or deep work, they frequently enter these states of flow, which makes the days feel much shorter. But there's another massive psychological factor, novelty. In one experiment, people were shown a series of repeating images on a screen for the exact same amount of time. But when a brand new novel image, like a picture of a dog, was suddenly thrown into the mix, people universally swore the dog was on the screen longer than the other pictures. It actually wasn't. It just felt longer because it was new, and new things force your brain to invest more active energy into processing them. The core takeaway here is that our subjective sense of duration correlates directly with how much energy our brains are using at that given moment. And if we look at energy usage over a human lifetime, we find a truly fascinating peak. A 5-year-old child uses an astounding 66% of their resting energy intake entirely on their brain. Why? Well, because when you are 5 years old, literally everything is a novel experience. Your brain is working in overdrive, burning massive amounts of energy to process a world it has never seen before. To put that into perspective, that massive energy expenditure perfectly explains why childhood seems to drag on so incredibly slowly.
Section 3. How to slow down time.
So, having learned all of this, the logical next question is, can we actually hack the system to slow down our perception of time as adults? Well, be careful what you wish for, because these scientifically proven options aren't exactly a walk in the park. To slow time down, you basically need to make yourself hyper-aware of time passing. Number 1 on our list, fear. In a real experiment, arachnophobes were forced to stare at spiders for exactly 45 seconds. When asked later, they judged the time to be significantly longer than it actually was. Number 2, extreme stress. Studies involving skydivers and people falling out of airplanes show that intense adrenaline drastically stretches their perception of the duration. And number 3, utter boredom. When you're just waiting around with nothing to focus on, you become acutely aware of every single ticking second, making the moment drag on forever.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Section 4. The Great Time Paradox.
So scaring yourself, falling out of airplanes, and being totally bored will definitely slow down your internal clock. But experiencing time isn't quite that simple. We've arrived at the Great Time Paradox. The reality is we experience time in 2 completely conflicting ways simultaneously: time in the moment and time in memory. Let's use an amazing vacation as an example. When you're on a trip experiencing novel things, having fun, and entering a flow state, the time in the moment absolutely flies by. It's over before you know it. But because of all that incredible novelty, your brain was forming hundreds of rich, dense, new memories. So when you finally get home and look back on the trip, your brain judges the length of the vacation by the sheer volume of memories formed. It feels like you were gone for a month. The ultimate paradox is that novelty makes the present go incredibly fast, but makes the past feel incredibly long. Which brings us to a quote from Albert Einstein that just perfectly sums up the human condition. He said, "Put your hand on a stove for a minute and it'll feel like an hour. But sit next to a pretty girl for an hour and it'll feel like a minute." It's humorous, for sure, but deeply profound. If you really want time to go slowly, there are a lot of terribly unpleasant things you can do to drag out the clock. But as the science shows us, the happiest life, and ultimately the longest remembered life, is one where time seems to fly. We've explored the biological slowing of our internal clocks, the massive energy our brains burn on novelty, and the paradox of how we remember the past. Knowing that we have to balance the fleeting nature of happy moments with the rich, long memories they leave behind, we want to leave you with one final provocative question to ponder today. What would you like your life to feel like? Do you want to stretch the minutes out with boredom and stress? Or let the years fly by in a flow of joy and novelty? It's your time. Spend it well. Thanks for joining us on this explainer, and we'll see you next time.